Marisol Diaz first smelled the theater before she saw it. A century of leaky roofs, city soot, and pigeons had stewed together into an odor like damp books and old brass. The marquee's letters were long gone, leaving only rusted screws spelling an accidental braille. Inside, the balcony sagged like a tired eyelid, and someone had chalked, "Do not enter," across the stage traps. But the Riverside Lyric still had its bones, crimson seats now pink and frayed, proscenium columns embraced by gilt vines, a grand chandelier resting on the floor like a wounded starfish, prisms dull with dust. The city had hired Marisol because the Lyric's new owners, a pair of property developers with a nostalgia streak, wanted to reopen the place in 6 months. Her job was to modernize the sound system without destroying the old acoustics that had made the Lyric famous before it closed in 1974. She was 44, with a coil of black hair often secured by whatever pencil, screwdriver, or Allen key was nearest. She liked rooms that fought back, dive bars with humming coolers, gymnasiums that swallowed bass, churches that whispered every cough. A decrepit vaudeville palace was exactly her idea of paradise. The first few days were typical reclamation work. She mapped cable routes, inspected power supplies, and marked speaker positions with painter's tape. Every clang of her ladder echoed so magnificently that she caught herself applauding the room. On Wednesday morning, she tested the first installed monitors with pink noise stack that swept each frequency like a janitor's broom. She stood center stage, tablet in hand, measuring the spell curves. Good, she thought, even better than expected. Then, in the moment she powered down the generator, a round of applause burst behind her. It was not a minor sound. Hundreds of hands clapped in unison, an ovation with shoulders, elbows, bodies. Marisol spun, heart sprinting. The house was empty. Dust motes drifted under the skylight like disinterested snow. The applause continued, 5, maybe 7 seconds longer, then faded at the same impossible volume into silence. She checked her rig. All mics muted, mixer off, main breaker disengaged. Nothing had amplified that handclap hurricane, at least not electronically. She laughed, half terrified, half impressed. "Acoustics are good," she muttered, voice shaky. "Maybe too good." That night in her sublet, she tried to rationalize old recordings. But the fly loft was gutted of gear. Bluetooth interference? With no power? She told herself fatigue could hallucinate anything. She still dreamed, sometimes, of trains breaking outside her childhood apartment. The shriek of metal that had punctured every homework session. The brain was a projector that never asked permission. The next day, during a structural inspection, she discovered the Lyric's old sound booth. It's perched at the rear of the balcony like an afterthought, its door half concealed by a velvet drape. Inside, amber light leaked through missing panes. Dust-jacketed reels of magnetic tape lined one wall, each labeled in fountain pen flourishes. Hamlet Touring Code 1951. Ziegfeld Follies Retrospective 1960, Community Recital 1968. She exhaled a small wow. Reel-to-reel archives were catnip for a woman who once soldered her own cassette Walkman at age 13. But near the reels, she found something stranger. A stack of yellow legal pads. Dates in the margins, but where a production title should be, there were blank lines. Below, scribbles in the same hand described cues. Curtain in spots 2 and 5, house to 20%, followed by applause, crowd insistent. Marisol flipped through 6, 7 pads, all identical. Meticulous prompt books for shows whose names were never filled in. She felt the applause again, phantom pulses against her palms. That afternoon she threaded one of the reels on an ancient Ampex deck, expecting orchestral overtures or comedic patter. Instead, she heard silence. 30 seconds. Then a door creak. A hush that passes through an audience when the lights dim, and, distinctively, the same applause she had heard the day before. No actors' voices, no music cues, just a hungry audience clapping, stopping, then clapping again, louder, as if demanding someone come out and rescue them from anticipation. Marisol rewound, played it twice more. It was not a degraded loop. Variations proved real people had once made that sound. But who records only applause? What show begins and ends with want? She called the Historical Society and asked about missing tapes. The archivist told her. The Lyric closed mid-season. Bankruptcy. Last scheduled production was a charity review that never happened. Rumor says staff arriving that final morning heard crowds inside, though the doors were locked. Superstitious nonsense. He chuckled. People want a theater to be haunted. Makes bankruptcy feel romantic. The next week she resumed installation, trying to ignore the invisible ticket holders. When she drilled through proscenium masonry to run Cat6 cable, she wore noise-canceling earbuds. Music, podcasts, white noise, anything to banish phantom clapping. For 3 days it worked. She almost convinced herself the first incident had been the taped applause bleeding from a monitor when she forgot to mute a channel. On Friday she stayed late calibrating subs. She pushed 40 hertz through the cabinets until the air quivered. When she shut down, the building answered, not with applause, but with a single unified stomp. Every seat in the orchestra seemed to strike the floor in perfect synchronization. The boom rattled plaster from ceiling corners. She screamed an unprofessional word and fled outside, where evening traffic sounded like salvation. Enough, she decided. She would not be bullied by nostalgia trapped in a condemned concert hall. She was a professional. If an audience was demanding a performance, she would give them one on her terms. Saturday morning, Marisol rolled in 2 portable recorders, a laptop, and a box of transducers, little speakers designed to turn any surface into a loudspeaker. She spent the day mapping the room's resonant frequencies, noting where claps seemed to originate, always from occupied seating sections, never the aisles. She placed the transducers under 20 randomly chosen seats and fed them applause she'd edited into an echo-laden swirl. If the ghosts wanted reinforcement, she'd reinforce. If they wanted to hear themselves, she'd mirror them. At dusk, she closed the doors, killed the work lights, and took her position at the center of the silent stage. She'd written a short speech, half technical demonstration, half exorcism. She pressed record on every device. "Good evening," she announced to the gloom. Her voice bounced, returning crisp as new-cut glass. A hiss began, breaths, fabric shifts. She felt a tension knitting itself out of the dark. "I am Marisol Zecher. I recognize the audience present." She paused, embarrassed by her own phrasing. "You have been waiting a very long time. Tonight, I offer a performance in 3 movements." A light applause drifted from the balcony, stopping the hair on her arms upright. It was neither mocking nor sarcastic. It was simply expectant. She cued her first track, a field recording of the Hudson River, lapping against pilings. Over it she layered faint, melodic feedback tuned to the theater's stucco cavities. The sound filled the house, made the seats hum like wineglasses rubbed by wet fingers. She walked the apron, listening through both ears and bones, the building itself a giant cello. When the movement ended, the applause roared, full capacity, standing ovation. The sound overwhelmed her, but she kept breathing, kept bowing. Phase 1, success. Movement 2 was riskier. She'd sampled human voices, laughs, murmurs, coughs from the archival reels, chopped them into rhythms, and triggered them via MIDI pads. The ghosts heard their own artifacts remixed into music. The result was a living concerto of themselves, their anticipation, their need, their communal yes. It felt electric, borderline unholy, but also deeply kind, the way a mirror can be mercy if you haven't seen your face in years. Applause followed, softer this time, less desperate. She could almost detect gratitude. Finally, movement 3. Silence. She dimmed the mains until only exit signs glowed like dying coals. Then she addressed the seats. "I don't know why you're here," she said, microphone off, voice naked. "But every show needs an ending. Let me help." She stood in the dark, willing her heart to anchor the room. A single clap. The ghost of a ghost rose from row G, center. Another responded from the balcony. Slowly, pairs of hands met in slow, fanning waves, each clap farther apart, until gaps opened like tide pools. After 90 seconds, the last clap echoed and the house became so silent she heard her own tear drop onto the floorboards. When she turned the ghost lights back on, there was no encore. Outside on the sidewalk, she found her lungs shaking with cold, or triumph, maybe both. She reviewed the recordings that night, expecting to hear evidence of the spectral chorus, but the tracks were almost empty. Her voice, yes. The river, the feedback, the loops, yes. The applause, however, was faint, distant, nothing like what had battered her bones. On the waveforms, peaks barely rose above background hiss. It made sense in a way. Microphones capture pressure, not presence. Monday arrived with fresh tasks. The developers wanted trough boxes for cable runs, the electricians demanded conduit diagrams, the fire marshal insisted the stage traps be sealed. Ghosts were not on anyone's docket. But as Marisol adjusted to normalcy, the lyric did not. The applause returned now at random, a short, polite clap when she tightened a bolt, a mischievous gulf clap if she swore at a stripped screw, a rafter-shaking ovation when she finished aligning the line. VOH10. She learned to greet these bursts with a flourish, as though accepting invisible bouquets. Somehow it helped. Around that time, an email came from the head of programming. They wanted to book a gala opening in 4 months, a mix of speeches, local bands, tradespeople recognized for their labor. It would be great, the programmer wrote, if we could include a short sound art piece showcasing the theater's history, something immersive. Interested? Marisol stared at the screen. The request felt like fate offering a cue. She designed a piece titled Echo Season. It would last 15 minutes, highlight the restoration process, and honor everyone who'd ever performed or watched inside the lyric, including, she decided, the ones stuck between. She programmed multi-channel playback through the new Meyer rigs, concealed subwoofers under the stage, and fitted binaural mics at 2 seats to stream real-time audience noise into the mix. She also left blank segments, cutting power to the mains for unpredictable intervals. She hoped the ghosts would claim those gaps. The night of the gala, Marisol wore her best jumpsuit, black with copper stitching, pockets lined in gaffer tape, just in case. Celebrities, donors, city officials milled under the restored chandelier, now lifted high and radiant. The seats were newly upholstered in burgundy velvet, not a hint of graffitied plaster remained. Yet Marisol sensed the old dust folded into the new stuffing, the past breathing beneath each cushion. Her piece began with archival snippets, an operatic soprano recorded in 1939, a vaudeville MC cracking jokes about prohibition, a 1957 doo-wop group rehearsing Shboom. The audience smiled, charmed nostalgia doing its easy work. Then industrial sounds, sanders, hammers, power drills, rose dovetailing into beats. Spotlights roved the trellis, revealing workers in overalls who stood from the wings, holding the very tools they'd used to remake the lyric, tap dancing with screw guns like it was Busby Berkeley Industrial. Laughter and applause erupted, genuine and mortal. Marisol muted the mains. Her cue sheet designated a 30-second blackout. It lasted 4. They came in like breakers, applause crashing from balcony to boxes, ricocheting across new plaster and fresh gold leaf. The living audience swung their heads, startled. Some began to clap in response, assuming the effect was part of the show. The ghosts accepted and amplified, doubling the tempo, then tripling it. The sound grew animal. A migrating herd, a stadium after a miracle goal. Fixtures vibrated. Someone yelped, convinced the thunderous swirl would drop ceiling tiles again. Marisol felt fear grip her, then a steadier sensation, directing an orchestra whose instruments she couldn't see. She raised her arms. Instinctively, the roar dipped to a hush, like a conductor's baton carving silence. She spoke into her mic, voice reverent, calm. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for returning. Tonight, the lyric is yours again." A single cheer echoed, a childlike whoop from the mezzanine, followed by scattered chuckles. The ghosts apparently still enjoyed good timing. The living crowd laughed too, relief palpable. Marisol cued the finale, a windchime chord that blossomed into organ pipes. then receded. Lights warmed and brightened until the house glowed gold. The applause, both kinds, merged. Long, joyous, indistinguishable. Afterward, the mayor praised her ingenious integration of surround sound and historical scholarship. Critics wrote about augmented auditorium acoustics. No one used the word haunting. Maybe nobody wanted to, or maybe language fails when experience slips between categories. The next weeks were busy. Regional theaters called. Sound journals requested interviews. She declined most invitations, partly from humility, partly because she kept hearing stray claps in cafes, subways, even in her own kitchen. It was as though fragments of that other audience were following her home. Or maybe her ears had learned to detect human longing the way dogs detect ultrasonic whistles. One evening she sat alone in the Lyric, legs dangling over the orchestra pit. The renovation smelled sawdust, paint, was giving way to perfume. Popcorn, spilled Pinot Noir. She liked that. It meant stories were accumulating again. She closed her eyes and said softly, "What show do you want next?" A rustle answered from the house, but no clapping, no stomp. Instead, she heard pages turning, programs being read. She imagined them plodding, these echo people, curating seasons of impossible plays. She grinned. "Let me know your tech requirements." Days later, a padded envelope arrived at her office, no return address. Inside was a single blank legal pad, identical to the ones in the old booth. On the top line was written in careful cursive, title, TBA notes, opening night pending. Beneath, the prompt book waited, empty cues, ready for her to fill or to follow, she couldn't yet tell. She felt the familiar jolt of dread and delight, the feeling of a room that still had secrets, that refused to be merely tamed. Marisol fetched a pencil from her hair and wrote on the next line, "Sound engineer, present."